"You're not dying, old man. Stop being dramatic." That's what my son said to me at the Thanksgiving table, about 4 seconds after he reached down and pulled the plug on my oxygen machine so he could plug in his wife's hairdryer. I was 72 years old. I have a lung condition, and I run a concentrator, the machine that pulls oxygen out of the air and feeds it to me through a little tube under my nose, and it makes a sound when it loses power. The alarm, a steady beeping, that means the flow has stopped. And my son heard that alarm. He heard it start. He looked right at me, sitting at the head of the table where I have carved every Thanksgiving turkey for 30 years, and he watched my face start to change, and he watched me put my hand to my chest, and he said, "You're not dying, old man. Stop being dramatic." And he turned around and plugged in the hairdryer. His wife laughed. I want you to hear that part, because it's the part I can't put down. She laughed. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway of my kitchen with her styling half done, and she laughed at me, while I sat at my own table getting the panicked, drowning feeling you get when the air stops being enough, my lips going, my hands starting to tingle. And the rest of the table, there were other people there, the rest of the table looked at their plates. Because my son had said it wasn't serious and my son was loud and certain, and it's easier to believe the loud, certain person than to make a scene at Thanksgiving. So I was on my own, in a room full of my own family. And here's what I did, and it's the whole reason I'm telling you this story. I did not panic, I did not beg, I did not grab at my son's arm. I reached into my cardigan pocket, and I took out my phone, and with my hand shaking and my chest heaving, I made one short phone call, 9 words, and I put the phone back in my pocket. And I sat there and I breathed as best I could. And 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my front door. And when my son opened that door and saw who was standing on the other side of it, the smile came right off his face. All of it. In 1 second. I watched it happen, and I will be honest with you. After what he'd done, watching that smile disappear was the first full breath I'd taken all afternoon, in more ways than one. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and none of this means what it needs to mean unless I tell it in order, because you need to understand who I called, and why it was so much worse for him than he could possibly have imagined, and how a man calling for help ended up putting his own son on the wrong side of something a lot bigger than a family argument. And I promise you, it is not what you think, and the knock is worth the wait. So stay with me. And if you have ever been made to feel like your suffering was an inconvenience, like your struggle was you being dramatic, by somebody who should have been the first one to help you, reach down and hit that subscribe button right now. Because this is a story about a man who was told to stop being dramatic while he couldn't breathe, and about the quiet phone call that changed everything. Let me back up. My name is Silas Renner. I'm 73 years old now, and all of this happened last year, at Thanksgiving, when I was 72. And I've had a year to sit with it, and I'm going to tell it to you straight, including the parts that don't make me look strong, because there aren't as many of those as I'd like, but there are some. Let me tell you who I am, so the rest lands. I worked with my hands my whole life. I was a machinist. I made precision parts, the kind of work where you're measuring to the thousandth of an inch, where being close isn't good enough. I did that for 40-some years, in the same shop for the last 30 of them, and I was good at it, and I took pride in it, and it paid for a house and a life and raising my son, and it wore my body out doing it. The lungs are from the work, partly. Decades of fine metal dust and coolant mist, before anybody was as careful about that as they should have been. And partly, it's just the luck of the draw. I want to tell you one thing about that work because it explains how I think, and how I think is the whole reason this story ends the way it does. When you machine a part to the thousandth of an inch, you learn a particular discipline. You do not panic and you do not rush, and you measure twice before. You cut once, because a mistake in metal is permanent and expensive, and there's no talking your way out of it afterward. The part is either right or it's scrap. 40 years of that gets into your bones. It teaches you that the loud, fast, emotional response is almost always the wrong one, and that the person who stays calm and does the next correct thing in the correct order is the person who walks away with something that works. I mention it now because in about 10 minutes I'm going to be sitting at a dinner table unable to breathe, and the thing that saved me was not strength and it was not luck. It was 40 years of learning not to panic and to do the next correct thing in order. A machinist reached for that phone, not a victim. The lungs are from the work, partly, decades of fine metal dust and coolant mist before anybody was as careful about that as they should have been, and partly it's just the luck of the draw. Either way, the last few years I've been on oxygen, not every minute, but a good part of the day and always when I'm resting or sitting for a long stretch, like at a dinner table. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because I need you to understand that the oxygen isn't decoration. It isn't a security blanket. It's medicine. A doctor prescribed it, the same as a heart patient's pills, and you would no more yank a man's oxygen for a hairdryer than you'd flush someone's insulin down the toilet to free up the fridge shelf. That's the thing my son could not seem to hold in his head. To him, it was a nuisance appliance taking up an outlet. Let me tell you about my wife, because she's the reason this house is what it is, and the reason her absence made all of this possible. Her name was Coretta. We were married 38 years. She passed 4 years ago. Her heart, quick, which the doctors told me was a mercy and which did not feel like a mercy to me, and Coretta was the warm one. I was the quiet one, the one in the garage, the one who showed love by fixing your car and paying your tuition and never once saying the actual words. Coretta said the words. Coretta held the family together with both hands, and she was especially the one who held our son in line because she could see him clearly in a way I couldn't or wouldn't. She said something to me once, a couple of years before she died, that I've thought about every single day since that Thanksgiving. She said, "Silas, you give Denton things instead of standards, and one day you're going to find out that a person you only ever gave things to doesn't actually respect you. He just knows where the things come from." And I told her she worried too much, and she looked at me the way she did when she knew she was right and knew I wasn't ready to hear it, and she let it go. She was right. God, she was right. I want to give you one more thing about Coretta, because she's the quiet center of this whole story, even though she'd been gone 4 years when it happened. She was the one who made me get the oxygen in the first place. Years back, before she died, when I was still telling everyone I was fine, coughing in the garage and waving it off, she's the one who dragged me to the doctor, who sat in the room and made me tell the truth about how short of breath I really was, because I'd have downplayed it into an early grave out of pure stubbornness. She took my health more seriously than I did. That was Coretta's whole way of loving a person. She took you more seriously than you took yourself. And here's the thing I understood, much later, sitting in that hospital bed the night of the Thanksgiving. When Denton pulled that plug and told me to stop being dramatic, he was doing the exact opposite of what his mother had spent her life doing. She took my struggle seriously when even I wouldn't. He dismissed it as theater when it was nearly killing me. And somewhere in those 4 years without her, with no one left to take me seriously, I'd started to shrink, to apologize for my own oxygen tank, to feel like a burden, to half believe the dismissal myself. That's what the absence of the one person who takes you seriously does to you. It's also, I think, what made me an easy target. She was right. God, she was right. Let me tell you about my son. Denton is 40 years old. He is my only child, and I'm going to be honest about him in a way that's hard for a father to be, because you can't understand that Thanksgiving without it. Denton is not a bad man in the way of criminals. He's something quieter, and I've come to think sadder than that. He is a man who was given everything and asked for nothing in return, and who grew up to believe that this was simply the natural order, that things flow toward him, from me, because that's what I'm for. I paid for his school. I helped him buy his first house. When his own money got tight, which it did often, because Denton has always lived slightly beyond whatever he has, I helped, quietly, and I never asked him to change anything, because asking would have meant a hard conversation, and I have avoided hard conversations with my son his entire life. That's my failure. Coretta named it exactly, and I did it anyway. And here is the specific thing that had been growing, this last year, that I want you to understand, because it's the soil the Thanksgiving thing grew out of. Since Coretta died, Denton had started treating me as though I were already halfway gone. Not cruelly, at first, just dismissively. He talked over me. He talked about me in the third person while I was in the room, to his wife, about my health, about my situation. When I said I was tired or short of breath, there was this flicker of impatience, like I was performing, like my body's actual limits were a bid for attention. And under it all, I could feel, a son can feel this, I could feel him waiting for the house, waiting for what's left, treating my decline as an inconvenience standing between him and an inheritance he'd already spent in his mind. I saw it, and I said nothing, because saying something would have been hard. Same as always. There was one afternoon a few months before that Thanksgiving that I should have treated as the warning it was. Denton had come by, and I'd had a bad breathing day, and I'd had to stop halfway up my own stairs to catch my breath, holding the rail. And instead of concern, he got this impatient look, and he said to Priyanka, right in front of me, like I was furniture, "This is what I mean. He can't stay in this house much longer. It's not realistic." It's not realistic. About me, in my own home, on my own stairs, while I stood there getting my breath. And I heard, underneath it, the thing he wasn't quite saying. It would be simpler for everyone if you'd hurry up and become manageable. If you'd move somewhere, or decline predictably, or otherwise stop being a variable in his planning. He didn't wish me dead, I want to be fair. It wasn't that. He just experienced my continued independent existence as an inconvenience, and he'd stopped bothering to hide it. I said nothing. I climbed the rest of my stairs. Same as always. And I think if I'd found my spine on those stairs, that Thanksgiving might never have happened. But I didn't, and it did. I saw it, and I said nothing, because saying something would have been hard. Same as always. His wife, Denton married her about 6 years ago. Her name is Priyanka. His wife took her cues from him. She was never warm to me, but she wasn't openly hostile either, until she saw that Denton treated my needs as theatrics, and then she felt free to do the same. That's how it works with a certain kind of couple. One of them sets the temperature and the other one matches it. Now, let me tell you about that Thanksgiving. It was at my house. It's always at my house. It was Coretta's house, really. The heart of it was always her. And after she died, I kept hosting because it was the one day I still felt like the family had a center, and I was the center of it, and giving that up felt like giving up more than I could stand to. So, I cooked, mostly. I'm not bad in the kitchen, Coretta taught me, with Denton and Priyanka coming over, and Priyanka's sister and her husband, and a couple of longtime friends of mine, an older couple named the Alvarados who'd been coming to our Thanksgiving for 20 years, 9 of us, all told. And it was fine for a while. It was nice even. I had my concentrator running by my chair at the head of the table, tube under my nose, the way I always do when I'm going to be sitting a long time, and I'd stopped even thinking about it, the way you stop thinking about your glasses. And partway through the meal, Priyanka decided she wanted to redo her hair, some evening thing they were going to after, and she went to plug her hairdryer into the outlet in the dining room. And that outlet, the one nearest the table, was the one my concentrator was plugged into. There's a power strip there, and she said, "Ugh, there's no room. The old man's machine is in the only plug." The old man's machine. And Denton, and I watched him do this. I want to be clear that this was not an accident. He did not trip over a cord. Denton reached down and he pulled the plug on my concentrator out of the strip and handed it up over his shoulder toward the counter like it was nothing, and told his wife to plug her dryer in. And my machine started to alarm. That beeping. That steady, insistent beeping that means the oxygen has stopped flowing. And within a few breaths, it's not instant, but it comes faster than you'd think when your lungs are already bad, I started to feel it. That tightening. That sense of pulling and not getting enough back. My chest got heavy. My lips started to go tingly and numb, which is a thing that happens, and I know from experience is a bad sign. And I said, and I could hear that my own voice had gone thin, I said, "Denton, plug it back in. I need that." And my son looked at me. He looked right at me, at his father, going pale at the head of the table with a tube under his nose and his hand pressed flat against his own chest. And he said, "You're not dying, old man. Stop being dramatic. She needs the plug for 2 minutes." And he turned back around, and Priyanka laughed. I want to sit in that moment with you for a second, because I've had a year, and I still can't entirely get to the bottom of it. It wasn't even the cruelty of pulling the plug that broke something in me. It was the laugh. It was that I sat there, genuinely frightened, genuinely unable to get enough air, and my daughter-in-law found it funny. Found me funny. A struggling old man was a comic bit to her, and my son had given her permission, with 4 words, "Stop being dramatic," to see it that way. And the table, the Alvarados, Priyanka's sister, they were uncomfortable, I could see it, but Denton was so certain, so casual, that nobody moved. Because to move would be to say out loud that something terrible was happening at Thanksgiving dinner, and people will let almost anything happen rather than be the one who says that. And I understood, in that moment, sitting there fighting for air, something that I think a lot of you understand and wish you didn't. I understood that I was completely alone, in a house full of my own family, that the person who was supposed to protect me was the one hurting me, and everyone else was going to let him, because he was loud and I was quiet and it was easier. And I want to say something about the other people at that table, because I've thought a lot about them and I've landed somewhere that surprised me. I'm not as angry at them as you'd think. The Alvarados, Priyanka's sister, they were frozen, and freezing is a real thing that happens to decent people in a bad moment. When someone confident tells the room that nothing is wrong, it takes enormous courage to stand up and say, "No, actually, something is very wrong." And most people don't have that courage at the exact second it's needed. They have it later. They had it later at the inquiry when it counted in a different way. But in the moment, the loud certain man set the reality of the room, and everyone else deferred to it. And I understand that now, in a way I couldn't while it was happening to me. That's actually the most dangerous thing about a person like my son. It's not just what he does, it's that his certainty rewrites the room, so that everyone around him doubts what they're plainly seeing. I've watched him do it my whole life in small ways. That afternoon I watched him do it while I couldn't breathe. And that clarity, that cold, terrible clarity, is the thing that saved me. Because it stopped me from doing the natural thing, which was to keep pleading with my son. You cannot plead your way out of a situation with a person who has decided your suffering is a performance. Pleading just gives them more performance to dismiss. So I stopped asking him. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan where my phone was, and my hands were shaking, and it took me 2 tries. And I dialed 3 numbers, 911. And when the dispatcher answered, I said, quietly, because I didn't have much air to spare, and I turned my head a little away from the table. I said 9 words. "My oxygen was disconnected. I can't breathe. Please hurry." And I gave the dispatcher my address, and she stayed on the line with me, calm and steady, telling me help was on the way, telling me to try to relax my breathing, which is easier said than done, but her voice helped. And I put the phone back in my pocket, and I did not announce what I'd done. I just sat there, and I breathed, and I waited. Now, I want to be honest about the next few minutes because they were bad, and I don't want to pretend I was some serene picture of calm. I was scared, truly scared. There's a specific animal fear that comes with not being able to breathe that I would not wish on anyone. But here's the thing that got me through it. I knew help was coming. The dispatcher had told me so. And there is an enormous difference between being alone with your fear and being alone with your fear while knowing that in a few minutes a door is going to open and a competent stranger is going to walk through it and help you. That knowledge is a kind of oxygen all its own. And I'll tell you what else. After a few minutes, Priyanka finished with her hairdryer, and this is the detail that tells you everything. Denton reached down and plugged my concentrator back in, casually, like he was doing me a favor, like the whole thing had been nothing. And the flow came back, and my breathing started to ease, slowly. And he said, not even really looking at me, "See, you're fine. You always do this. You always do this." As though I had done something. As though the drama had been mine. And I said nothing. I just looked at him. Because I knew something he didn't know. I knew that in about 15 minutes this was going to stop being a story he got to tell his way. Now let me tell you about the knock. It came about 20 minutes after my call. 2 firm knocks, and then, because it's what they do, the door opening, and a voice calling out, "Paramedics!" And I watched my son's face. Because Denton had no idea I had called anyone. He thought the whole thing was over. He thought he'd smoothed it out, plugged the machine back in, made his little joke, and moved on. And now there were two paramedics coming through his father's front door with a bag and a stretcher, and his face went from confusion to understanding to something I can only call fear in about 2 seconds flat. That smile, that casual, dismissive, I'm in charge here smile he'd been wearing all afternoon, it fell right off. Because he realized, all at once, that this was real and official and outside his control, and that his father had made it happen while he was drying his wife's hair. The paramedics were wonderful. A younger man and a woman, maybe in her 40s, calm and quick and kind. They came straight to me. They checked my oxygen levels, my saturation, the number that tells you how much oxygen is actually in your blood, and I could tell from the way the woman's mouth tightened that the number was not good. It had dropped during those minutes to a level that concerned her. They put me on their own oxygen, a higher flow, and they started asking me questions, and they started, gently, to put together what had happened. And here is the turn in this story. Here is the part my son did not see coming, and could not have. Because when the paramedic, the woman, her name was Yesenia, it was on her uniform, when Yesenia asked me plainly, "Sir, can you tell me what happened? How did your oxygen get disconnected?" The whole table went silent. And I looked at my son, and I had a choice in that moment. I could protect him, the way I had protected him his whole life, the way I had avoided every hard thing with him for 40 years. I could say it came unplugged, an accident, no harm done. And I want to tell you honestly that a part of me wanted to, even then, even after everything. Because he's my son, and the instinct to cover for your child does not switch off just because your child has hurt you. That instinct is bone deep, and it does not care whether it's deserved. But I thought about Coretta. I thought about what she said. You give him things instead of standards. And I understood, sitting there breathing another person's oxygen, that the most loving thing, and the hardest thing, and the only thing that might actually reach my son before it was too late for him as a man, was to finally, for the first time in his life, let him face the truth of something he'd done. So I told her. Calmly, plainly. I said, my son unplugged it. To plug in a hairdryer, he heard the alarm. I told him I needed it, and I told him I couldn't breathe, and he told me to stop being dramatic, and he left it unplugged for several minutes. And the room was so quiet you could hear my concentrator humming. And Yesenia, I watched her face change into something very still and very serious. Because paramedics are trained in this. They see it more than you'd think. And what I had just described was not a family squabble. What I had just described to a first responder on an official emergency call was the knowing disconnection of prescribed, life-sustaining medical equipment from a vulnerable elderly person who verbally stated he could not breathe. That has a name. That is not drama. That is endangerment of a vulnerable adult. And once it's said out loud to a paramedic on a live 911 call, it does not go back in the box. There is a report, there is a record. There are mandated steps that follow, whether the family wants them to or not. Because the whole point of those protections is that they don't depend on the vulnerable person being willing to press the issue against their own family. And I saw Denton's face when it landed on him, when he understood, watching Yesenia's expression change, that this had stopped being a family matter. Because up to that second I think he genuinely believed that the worst case was an awkward Thanksgiving, a father sulking, maybe a tense phone call in a week that he could smooth over. He operated his whole life on the assumption that anything that happened inside the family stayed inside the family, where he held all the cards, where his charm and his volume and my endless willingness to forgive him meant there were never any real consequences. And he watched a stranger in a uniform write something down, and he understood, all at once, that the walls of the family had just come down, and that what he'd done was now standing out in the open air where anyone could see it, measured against a standard that wasn't his and couldn't be talked out of. Denton started to talk. He started to say, "Okay, hang on, it wasn't like that, he's exaggerating, he does this." And Yesenia, without any heat at all, in the flattest, most professional voice you've ever heard, said, "Sir, I need you to step back and let us work. You'll have a chance to give your account. But right now I need you to not interfere with this patient's care." And I watched my 40-year-old son get spoken to like that, in his father's dining room, by a woman half his size with a clipboard, and the entire weight of the system behind her, and I watched him understand that he had walked into something he could not charm or dismiss or talk over. For the first time in his life, being loud and certain did not work. The lady with the oxygen tank was not impressed by him, and he sat down, and he shut up. Now, I want to be careful and truthful about what happened after, because this is where these stories go stupid and start promising things that don't happen, and I told you I'd give it to you straight. Nobody put my son in handcuffs at the Thanksgiving table. That's not how it works, and if you've seen that in a video, somebody was lying to you. What actually happened is quieter and, in its way, heavier. The paramedics wanted to take me to the hospital because my oxygen levels had dropped enough to worry them, and I went, and I want to tell you it was the right call. I was kept overnight and I was fine, but fine was not guaranteed. And the doctor I saw made it very clear that a longer disconnection, or a worse day for my lungs, could have gone somewhere very different. This was not nothing. My son had gambled with something he did not understand and did not respect, and he had gotten lucky, and so had I. That night in the hospital was one of the strangest of my life, and I want to tell you about it, because something happened in that quiet room that mattered. They'd stabilized me, and my numbers had come back up, and around midnight it was just me, awake, in a dim room with the machines ticking, thinking. And a nurse came in to check on me, an older woman, and she was gentle, and at some point she asked, the way they do, whether there was anyone she should call, anyone who'd be worried, anyone coming to sit with me, and I realized I didn't want to call Denton, my own son, and the honest truth was that his presence would have made me feel less safe, not more, and that landed on me hard at midnight in that bed, that the person who was supposed to be my emergency contact, my next of kin, the one you call, was the reason I was in the bed. And I lay there and I thought about how long I'd been pretending that wasn't true, how I'd been calling a man my safety net who was actually the hole in it. And somewhere around 1 a.m, I made a decision, before I'd made any of the other decisions, before the will or the move or any of it. I decided I was done being loyal to a version of my family that didn't exist anymore, and that had maybe never existed the way I'd told myself. I decided to see them clearly, the way Coretta always had, however much it hurt. Everything else came from that midnight. So a few weeks later, there was an inquiry, a caseworker. Questions asked of me, of Denton, of the other people who'd been at that table, because there were witnesses, you see, and that turned out to matter enormously. The Alvarados, my old friends, told the truth about what they'd seen, and I think it cost them something to do it, and I will love them forever for it. Priyanka's own sister told the truth. It turns out that when there's an official inquiry and it's on the record, people are a great deal less willing to look at their plates than they are in the moment. Mr. Alvarado called me before he gave his statement. He's a man of my generation, and going against family, even someone else's family, does not come easily to men like us. And he said, "Silas, I have to tell them what I saw. I can't shave it. Cora," that's his wife, "and I talked about it, and we can't live with ourselves if we soften it. I hope you understand." And I told him that not only did I understand, but that his willingness to say it plainly was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in years. Because it was. Do you know what it means, after being told your suffering is a performance, to have someone say out loud to an official, "No, I was there, it was real, I saw it"? It's a kind of restoration I don't have a good word for. He gave me back my own reality. That's what a true witness does. And here's a thing I learned that's worth passing on. Those protections for vulnerable adults exist precisely because people like me are reluctant to press the issue against their own children. The system is built to not depend on my willingness, because my willingness is compromised by love. It moves on the facts and the witnesses whether I push or not. I found that oddly comforting. It meant I didn't have to be the one to prosecute my own son. I just had to tell the truth once, and let the truth do what it does. Nothing dramatic came of the inquiry in the legal sense. No charges in the end, which honestly I did not push for. Because I did not want my son in a courtroom, I wanted him to wake up. What came of it was a formal record, a set of findings, and a very clear, very official understanding that what had happened was abuse of a vulnerable adult, and that it was documented, and that it would be there, and that any repeat would be viewed in the light of it. And that record did something no lecture from me in 40 years had ever managed to do. It made it real. It took the thing out of the realm of family, where Denton had always been able to talk his way out of everything, and it put it into the realm of the official, where his charm was worth nothing, and the facts were worth everything. Now, let me tell you about the part that actually matters, the part after. Because the report and the inquiry, that's the plot, that's the satisfying part, that's the smile coming off his face. But it's not the point. The point is what I did next, and it's the thing I'm proudest of in this whole miserable story. I stopped hosting. I know that sounds small, it isn't. For 4 years since Coretta died, I had clung to being the center of that family, hosting the holidays, keeping everyone coming to my house, because I was terrified that if I stopped, I'd find out the family didn't have a center anymore, that it had died with her. And that Thanksgiving taught me something I should have learned sooner. I had been buying attendance. I had been paying, in effort and in money, and in swallowed grievances for people to keep showing up and treating me like an obstacle. So I stopped. And I made some other changes too, quietly, with a lawyer, and I'll tell you about those plainly, because I'm not ashamed of them. I changed my will. Not to punish Denton exactly, though I understand it looks that way. I changed it because I finally understood what Coretta had been trying to tell me, that leaving everything to a man who'd let me suffocate for a hairdryer wouldn't be a gift. It'd be the final proof that his contempt had worked. So I restructured things. Denton is still in it. He's my son, and I'm not built to cut him out entirely, and I don't want to. But the bulk of what I have is going elsewhere now. Some to the Alvarado's grandkids' education, because those people showed me more loyalty in one afternoon than my son had in a decade. A good deal to a foundation that provides respiratory equipment and support to people who can't afford it, because I know now, in my body, what it is to need that air, and I want to be the reason a stranger gets to keep breathing. And a portion held in a way that Denton can't touch as a lump sum, structured so it supports him modestly over time rather than handing him a fortune to burn. My lawyer called it putting up guardrails. I called it the standards I should have set 30 years ago. I also moved, sold Coretta's house, which was hard, harder than almost anything, and moved into a smaller place, a good place, with people around and help available, where I am not isolated and dependent on a son who resents me. It's the single best decision I've made since she died. I have neighbors who check on me. I have a life that doesn't run through Denton. There's a fellow across the hall named Gerald, about my age, a retired postal carrier, and we have coffee most mornings and argue about baseball and whose turn it is to buy the good creamer. There's a woman down the way who brings me a plate whenever she makes too much, which is often, and I've started fixing small things for people in the building, because a machinist never really retires. He just runs out of official work. A jammed drawer, a wobbly chair, a lamp that won't. It's not the life I had with Coretta. Nothing will be. But it's a life with me in it, treated like a person, needed in small good ways, and I did not have that at the end in that big, empty house, hosting holidays for people who'd let me suffocate. I breathe better here, honestly. And not just because there's help nearby. Some of it, I think, is that I'm not spending every day braced against being dismissed. That takes a toll on the body you don't notice until it's gone. And Denton. Here's the honest, complicated truth, because I promised you honesty. We are not estranged, but we are not what we were, and we may never be, and I've made my peace with that. For a long stretch after the inquiry, he was furious at me for humiliating him, for airing family business, for making it official. He genuinely, at first, saw himself as the wronged party, which tells you everything about how deep the problem ran. But something shifted slowly. Because the record was there, and it didn't go away, and I think being seen clearly by the system, being told, in official language, by strangers with no reason to flatter or fear him, that what he did was abuse, did something that no amount of my love ever could. It cracked the story he told himself. About 8 months after, he came to see me at my new place, and he sat there for a long time not saying much. And then he said, "Dad, I've been telling myself you overreacted, and I've been telling myself that for months, and I can't anymore." And he stopped. And then he said, very quietly, "I unplugged your oxygen. And you told me you couldn't breathe, and I told you to stop being dramatic. Just saying it, just letting it be true, out loud, for the first time, and his voice broke on it, and I did not rush to comfort him, the way I would have his whole life. I let him sit in it, because he needed to sit in it, and then I said, yes, you did, and I've forgiven you, but I'm not going back to being a man you can do that to. Those are two different things, and you need to understand that they're both true. And that was the most honest conversation I have ever had with my son. It only took me 72 years and a brush with suffocating at my own dinner table to have it. We talk now, sometimes. It's careful. It's real, which it never was before, because real requires that a person be able to see you clearly, and for the first time in his life, Denton sees me clearly. Priyanka and I are barely in contact, and I've made my peace with that too. Some things don't mend, and I've stopped believing I have to force them to. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, and then I'll let you go. My son told me to stop being dramatic while I was struggling to breathe, and the terrible arrogance of that, the certainty that he knew better than my own body and my own doctor what I needed, came from one place. It came from years of me letting him believe that my needs were negotiable, that my comfort, my dignity, my actual physical requirements were things that could be set aside when they were inconvenient to him, because I had always set them aside myself rather than have a hard conversation. I taught him that. Not on purpose, but I taught him over 40 years that Silas Renner's needs come last, even to Silas Renner. And then I was shocked when he acted on the lesson. The phone call didn't just save my life that afternoon. It was the first time in my adult life that I refused to let my suffering be dismissed. It was me, finally, taking my own struggle seriously enough to insist that someone else take it seriously too. And everything good that has happened since, the guardrails, the move, the honest conversation, the life I have now that actually has room for me in it, all of it started with the 72-year-old man deciding, while he couldn't breathe, that his own life was worth making a call about. That's the whole thing, really. That's what I'd want you to take from it. Do not let anyone, not your child, not anyone, teach you that your suffering is a performance, and do not teach it to yourself either, which is the harder one. When you cannot breathe, that is not drama. That is an emergency, and you are allowed to treat it like one, even if the person who caused it is someone you love, even if making the call means finally having the hard conversation you've spent your whole life avoiding. Make the call. Every time, you are worth the call. So let me ask you something, and I do read these. Have you ever had a moment where you finally stopped letting someone dismiss what you were going through, where you drew a line, maybe late, maybe much later than you should have, and it changed everything afterward? What was the line and what happened when you finally drew it? I'd truly like to hear it, because I drew mine at 72, and I know some of you have your own. And here's the one that matters most to me. Who in your life is the one who'd tell the truth about what they saw, even when it cost them something? Like my Alvarados did for me. Because those people are rarer and more precious than we let ourselves know, and if you've got one, I want you to think about them tonight, and maybe tell them what they are to you. Tell me about yours below. That's all I've got tonight. If it meant something to you, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you at the next one.